everybody? This is Nazdarachi, and coming back at you again today on behest of 5-9 Gaming, myself, Sunblade, and Troco have gathered together today to do somewhat of a review of Resident Evil 8 Village for everybody here. Now, we do know that the game has been out for a while, and plenty of y'all may have already seen a review, and that's why we've brought together all three of us so we can kind of bounce a few ideas off each other and kind of come to a general group consensus here. Something hopefully a little different than what you may have already seen floating around on YouTube already. If you guys are new here and you do enjoy this type of content, consider hitting the subscribe button and the bell. That definitely would help us out greatly, and we appreciate all the support. And as well, if you do enjoy the video, consider hitting the like button on it, so hopefully it can get a few more sets of eyes on it from the good old YouTube algorithm. With all that being said, let me go ahead and let everyone say hi for the day. Why don't you guys go ahead and say hello in no particular order, just whoever wants to, and we can move forward from there.
Oh.
Hello, guys.
Yes, Sunblade and Troco. Now, we do have a little bit of a format for today's discussion. We're going to start by giving Sunblade the floor here as what I would assume to be like a lifelong Resident Evil fan. He probably is one of the most well-educated on the subject material out of all three of us. So, Sunblade, why don't you go ahead and kind of catch us up to speed for where we need to be at for this review here.
Alright, so guys, in case you're not familiar with Resident Evil is a survival horror franchise that started in '96 with a third-person perspective and tank controls. The franchise focuses more on the single-player campaign and its storyline, but changed a lot over the years. Resident Evil 4 introduced a more fast-paced approach with the over-the-shoulder perspective, and Resident Evil 7 Biohazard changed things up again with the first-person perspective and went back to its core, the survival horror. Resident Evil Village takes place 3 years after the story of Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. Again, you are Ethan Winters, and Ethan survived his trip with the Baker family. After getting saved by Chris Redfield, Ethan and his wife Mia Winters settled down in Europe and got a child called Rose. But yeah, as Luis Serra once said, crawled out of one hole and into another. After reading a local fairy tale to the baby, the Winters family gets ambushed by none other than Chris Redfield. He quickly kills Mia and adopts Rose and Ethan. Poor guy. Now he is on a mission to find Rose in a village close by, and this will be one hell of a ride. First person survival horror with Capcom's very own video game engine, the RE engine.
And like you mentioned, I do feel like this game was heavily inspired by Resident Evil 4 to the point where I'd almost not be surprised if they reused a lot of the assets from this game in a upcoming Resident Evil 4 remake, which we're pretty sure that they're gonna do. Like, they've already done 1 through 3. This is a safe bet. So expanding on what Sunblade just started to cover towards the end of his analysis there, why don't we go ahead and give Troco the floor, and why don't you expand briefly on some of Resident Evil 8's design itself and any possible changes you noticed between 7 and 8 as well for possible returning players to the franchise here.
It's definitely a back to roots again type Resident Evil with the survival horror aspect once again in first person. It's not the most horror game out there. It's a good mix of horror and action, especially in the later parts of the game. Once you get to the factory area, it's definitely a lot more action than horror, but your first playthrough might spook you a bit. I don't know, shoutouts to Arsora. He said he was scared by it. Apparently before the game came out, they did mention that they did adjust the horror level compared to 7 because people found 7 too scary. Personally, I didn't really find it too scary, but 7 definitely had more of the atmospheric horror, whereas this game was a lot more open. Very rarely was it nighttime. I think only the beginning section, and that's it pretty much. Definitely a more action focused game, which I'm all down for. It's just a survival action game. All the scavenging, all the new game plus items you can unlock for later difficulties, which if we go into the difficulties, your first playthrough, probably on standard, will take you about 10 hours. It's definitely not a super long game, but once you get the swing of things, there is a achievement for beating it in under 3 hours. Pretty easy to do with a new game plus item. Now, unfortunately, new game plus is kind of weird in the game. The Village Shadows difficulty, I do like the intentions of it, but I think they executed it kind of poorly. It's not balanced great. It's almost impossible to go on without a new game plus item, but it's a joke if you go in with any New Game Plus items for the most part. So the hardest difficulty, I feel, could have been fine-tuned a bit more. So if you finish your first playthrough and hop in, it's definitely good, but just take the Dragoon and have fun with that. Aside from that, it's a good story-driven game. Story is pretty good. If you've played 7 and you like 7, you'll definitely enjoy the game a good bit, I'm sure.
Well, with that being said, 7 itself was a very consistent experience, right? You're generally, mostly in that Baker House area in Louisiana, and there wasn't nearly as much diversity in the different regions of the map. So one thing I do like about this game, now that we're kind of spilling over from design into gameplay, is the no loading screens. Like, essentially it's seamless. Everywhere you go would be like a different level, I guess you could say, but it doesn't really feel that way. You go from the village itself to the castle, from the castle to one of the best horror movie inspired levels. It's also extremely easy, but the whole dollhouse sequence, that was very atmospheric and creepy, although arguably a little bit not difficult enough and quick. But then from there to a swamp, from a swamp to a factory. So they have a good range of locations and seamless traversal between them with no noticeable loading time whatsoever. There's also like the return of the Mr. X system with Lady Dimitrescu. It's a very brief sequence, but it does kind of bring back some of those vibes from playing the RE2 remake, where Mr. X is kind of a constant threat that could basically show up anywhere and just force you to change your route or, just alter your strategy on the fly. I think those elements are really cool. And the fact that it's only in the game for a small portion of time, actually, I think lends to its credit, because it doesn't get, it's not too much of a good thing to the point where you get kind of bored of that mechanic. But it's also pretty interesting experiencing that in the first person camera. Again, might be a little bit more tension when you open a door and then a 9'6" lady is just bam right there in your face with her claws out. But as a non-Resident Evil fanatic, like as someone who kind of just jumps in and out of the series randomly, I had fun with it. I think the gameplay itself is mostly one of the beneficial aspects the game has to its credit. The gunplay is all very smooth. The shots go right where you aim them. You do kind of have to tinker with the settings for input delay a little bit, because picking up items while rushing through levels can be, a little bit hit or miss, but there are some settings that can help you dial that in. And beyond that, I didn't encounter really any bugs or glitches, really beyond a couple of enemies clipping through like walls or barricades occasionally. Very, very minor. But no real graphical glitches, no hard crashes during the middle of gameplay, and the game itself runs smooth and plays well for the experience it's trying to present. Again, I did play it on PC, which has the option of up to 120 frames per second or more, and the experience for me was very smooth, and again, didn't have any problems with the gameplay itself. I don't know, did you want to add anything to that, Sunblade, for gameplay stuff?
So, yeah, we talked a little bit about Resident Evil 4 in the beginning, and yeah, on the one side, Resident Evil Village doesn't invent anything new, I would say, outside of some minor things. But if you're a big fan of Resident Evil 4, like I am, you will immediately recognize a lot of stuff. Like a lot of locations are similar, the Castle Dimitrescu, or the later factory. Like, I personally believe that Capcom will reuse over 50% of its assets for a possible Resident Evil 4 remake in first person. Like, the red barrels, some switches, they look so similar. Like, yeah, they definitely invented this game with the Resident Evil 4 remake in mind. And yeah, some people are very happy with that, like I am, but some people could say that, like, this seems unoriginal, very lazy design. But yeah, for me personally, I'm very happy. We can finally, like, purchase weapons and upgrade them via the Duke, a new character in the game. Yeah, he even references the merchant.
What are you buying? Just something an old friend of mine used to say.
What are you buying? Is that all, stranger? Thank you.
From Resident Evil 4, so there's that.
What are you buying?
I like that. Yeah, exactly. And he also introduces a new like quote-unquote mechanic, like where you can actually like cook meals and increase your health permanently, or like get quote-unquote special abilities, like for example when you block stuff you get less damage or something. So that's interesting. The crafting mechanic is very important in the game. Good strategic element, like if you are, for example, in the factory and you encounter a certain enemy type, yeah, you have to figure out what to do with your resources and not like go ahead and waste everything for pistol or shotgun ammo. Sometimes you need ammo for the sniper rifle, and I like that too. But yeah, other than that, yeah, for me, Resident Evil Village is like basically Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 4 combined.
Our next little subsection shouldn't take too long, but it will differ a little bit depending on the platform of choice that the player has decided to go with. Again, I myself went with the Steam version on PC. The graphics have been, I don't want to say like literally breathtaking, but they are right up there with any other AAA game that, you've seen recently. The frame rate's very good. Again, I didn't have any graphical glitches. I believe, Troko, you played it on PC as well, and Sunblade was on console. What was your experience on the console in terms of the visual fidelity of the game, Sunblade?
So yeah, I played it on the Xbox One X, so on an quote-unquote older console, and it ran perfectly. So I didn't have to buy the Xbox Series X or PS5. The graphics were absolutely gorgeous. The RE engine is fantastic, and yeah, I had a lot of fun with it.
Troko, any other thoughts on graphics or, the visual look of the game?
I did at one point. I played the game for the most part in 1080, or just it was like I played it in like 1864 by like 1024 because it fit my monitor perfectly with how I have my thing set up, because I play in windowed mode for most of my games. But at one point I did go full super ultra wide 4K with ray tracing, 30 FPS, and when I was standing still looking at everything, it looked gorgeous, but the ray tracing, it didn't feel like it completely overhauled the graphics. It wasn't even really noticeable until I went out of my way to crank up the settings to basically maximum with it. But overall, yeah, the game looks great, and definitely 1080, 120 FPS with like medium to high settings was amazing. One of the best looking games I've played on PC.
Well, Sunblade, I know, has been an avid fan, so in terms of just 8 here, condensing it down to this game, kind of isolated from the rest of the RE verse, because we don't want to spoil anything, what are your kind of personal thoughts overall as like a super fan, Sunblade? We'll start with you, and then do Troko, and I'll go last for the different tiers of fandom here.
Yes, so let me go back real quick. So Resident Evil 7, as I mentioned at the beginning, changed the whole thing up, the whole franchise. It was a first-person experience, and I personally think that saved the franchise, since Resident Evil 6 was, in my opinion, very, very bad, and the franchise needed some changes. So yeah, I'm a fan of the first-person perspective, but I see like other opinions. Like if you say like Resident Evil 7 or Resident Evil Village is not a Resident Evil, not a true Resident Evil, I see that. So I personally like the idea that they brought Ethan Winters as a new character. So I think the plan was to not introduce Ethan as a character, but like the main character should be you, so you're more scared, and that works very, very well. And so yeah, the only complaints I have basically, and Nas already pointed this out, near the end of the game, the game for me personally becomes like a Call of Duty type of thing. Like in the stronghold, you face off against so many enemies. Like, dude, it reminds me a lot of RE4, but yeah, that type of action. Like, I wasn't very, very amused by it. Yeah, and as I said before, like the design choices were a bit unoriginal. Like for me, like they oriented too much on RE4. But some people might really, really love that. But yeah, it's a double-edged sword for me. And yeah, the bosses, last but not least, were, like, for me personally, like, too easy. Like, Heisenberg was a complete joke. Like, the weakness was too obvious. He went down so easily. Yeah, like, they should improve that experience. But other than that, I loved it. Yeah.
What about you, Troko? What are your personal thoughts on the package as a whole and how it fits into the RE verse?
I have a lot of positives and I have a couple big negatives, mainly with Capcom, but for the positives, I think RE7 was... I really, really love RE7. It's what got me into Resident Evil pretty much. And Resident Evil 7, looking back at it, feels like a Survivor story that was made into a full game, and then they, like, took RE8 and expanded upon 7, making it a core part of the RE universe, which I loved. How they wrapped up so many, like, loose ends, how they explained everything in 7, how, you know, everything in 8 was explained. It was wonderful. Now, my biggest problem is probably Capcom themselves with the game. Now, this is definitely a huge nitpick, but it's a problem that goes back to they didn't really playtest their game. They acknowledged they have a speedrunning and challenge run community, and they added an achievement about that, Knives Out. But that trophy, or achievement, is so garbage to get, because during one section of the game, you're supposed to defeat an enemy with basically, like, rocket launcher type things. You're supposed to, like, nuke the enemy, but you in Knives Out, you cannot do that. And they don't mention you can't do that. That enemy has more HP than the final boss by, like, 4 times over. That's probably my biggest issue with the game. Aside from that, everything else I did enjoy.
My personal thoughts on the game, I like the way that it tied into the other Resident Evils in the series. I will not spoil anything directly, but if you've ever seen the movie Prometheus, it's very similar to what happened there. I'll leave it at that. The graphical, visual fidelity of the game was impressive. You know, I didn't think that it broke any new ground and did anything revolutionary, but it was very good to look at. All of the behind-the-scenes motion capture footage, I actually did watch a lot of that, and you can see all the effort that the mocap actors put into their roles, which really translates over into a game where, even though I wasn't necessarily scared, I was still very much so pulled into the world and into the lore, and I did enjoy that very much. I think my biggest complaint about the game is directly contradictory to something that Sunblade said, which is in the writing of the game itself. Ethan Winters is written, or lack thereof, essentially, to be a blank slate, like Sunblade mentioned, to kind of get you into the shoes of the character and make it feel like it's you. Where I can see the strategy behind that, that is also a very well-known lazy writing technique. So they didn't have to develop a character, they didn't have to write a backstory, they didn't have to do anything to build up this character, because they're just going to assume that the player, you know, you're going to do all that back work for them because the player is you. I personally think that's extremely lazy, and it makes the character significantly less memorable than someone like Leon, Chris, Claire, or Jill, or even Wesker as a bad guy, you know? So overall, even though I do think he's pretty forgettable, you have to acknowledge his feats, right? He has done some impressive things, which makes him a very powerful character, just I feel like significantly lacking in personality. That's my biggest complaint about the game. But yeah, overall, I myself would recommend this game to anyone who likes first-person shooter experiences with a touch of horror, suspense. If you were a fan of Alien Isolation, I would definitely recommend trying out a game like this. Or if you were a fan of like the PT demo, Silent Hill, anything like that, this is probably worth a little bit of your attention. But due to the fact that there is no real online element to the game, I personally see no problem with waiting for it to come out at a sale price. You know, if you're that type of video game consumer, you know, there's no harm in waiting a little bit if you don't mind potentially being spoiled by the community as time goes on. So that's kind of my ultimate review here for this particular game. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to either Troko here. Give your final thoughts, your final score, and then Sunblade can wrap us up here.
It was so close to a 10 for me. Again, I know it's very nitpicky to come after the achievements, but, you know, normally knife-only stuff is a personal challenge that's not tied to an achievement, but because they made an achievement and part of the full game, but they did not playtest their game. It's not just the achievement. It's they didn't playtest their game enough, specifically for that, as well as Village of Shadows. It could be so close to a 10. Village of Shadows could have been like Madhouse, but, you know, 5 times better. Because Madhouse, I enjoyed Madhouse a lot. And I think Village of Shadows was really close to it. But again, they needed to tweak everything a bit more. Especially that one section I'm talking about with the, anybody who does the Knives Out thing will know what I'm talking about. And why it's so garbage. Because again, they just didn't take enough time, I feel. A couple frame rate hits here and there, mainly with the bug daughters, but that's about it. It's so close to a 10 for me, but I'm gonna give it between an 8 to probably a 9. What about you, Sunblade?
Okay, yeah, so I personally would give the game a solid 8.5 out of 10, like 10 being the perfect game. Yeah, Resident Evil Village was great, but it's not perfect. I laid it out before, the boss fights are kinda and especially the 3 daughters from Lady Dimitrescu, like they have all the same weakness and the fights are done so, like, it's basically the same deal, and yeah, like down the road, like closer to the end, it's more like a Call of Duty type of thing. And yeah, that brings me to a solid 8.5 out of 10. Great game. Like, if you are a survival horror fan, if you love Resident Evil, you will probably like this one. If you're not a fan of 7, you will probably don't like Resident Evil Village 2. But yeah, as for me, it was a great experience.
And that pretty much rounds out our non-spoiler kind of final review of the game as it stands right now in its current state, about within the first week of release. I think overall this is a game that we can all get behind. You know, my rating 7.5 up to about the highest rating 8.5. It's basically about the same range, which puts this in the definitely play if you're interested in this genre range. With that being said, this is 5-9 kind of signing off. Remember, we are live on Twitch as well almost every day, so if you want to see a lot of live format content, including us playing these games to get them to the point where we can review them, definitely check out the Twitch channel over there at 59gaming1 on Twitch, a little 1 at the end, unlike YouTube. And I just wanted to extend a personal thank you to Sunblade and Troco for coming on the video as well to lend me some of their time and expertise with the series. With that being said, this is Nazdarachi signing out here, saying goodbye. I'll let Troco and Sunblade do the same, and we will catch you on the next video.
Yep.
Take care, guys. Bye-bye.